one particularly cool feature that we can leverage in a mobile context by introducing this guy. So it turns out, and this is sort of retro if you were around when the internet was popular with Netscape, Navigator, the Navigator global object, similar in spirit to Window and Document, has special properties or methods associated with it. And Navigator in this case, Navigator refers to the browser itself as opposed to the window or the document that you're actually viewing. .geolocation is an API, an application programming interface, a set of functions, maybe properties that you, the programmer, can use to talk to the browser. Inside of this API is at least one method of interest today, getCurrentPosition. Now, this is a method that we can call just like getItem or setItem, but it works a little differently in that it doesn't just give me back the value right away. Finding the user's location is what's called an asynchronous problem to solve, right? Because it might take a few seconds to turn on the Wi-Fi antennas or the GPS radio and figure out where the user is. And one of the key design features of JavaScript is that as much as possible, things should be asynchronous, so that when something's happening over here, it doesn't block something else from happening here. You don't want the whole browser to lock up while you're trying to figure out the user's location. It would be nice if they could keep doing other things. So the means by which you can implement that design goal is by way of what are called callback functions. And we've seen these already, but now we can use them even more deliberately with this geolocation example. So let me go back to my directory listing and go into geolocation0.html. And I actually don't see anything yet, but what do I see apparently in my browser? Localhost wants to use your computer's location. So my computer's location, physically, GPS, latitude and longitude. Thankfully, Chrome is giving me a little bit of defense here and not just telling a random website, even though it happens to be running on localhost, where I am in the world. I mean, this could get down to a pretty precise location, and you don't want just to give that information out to anyone that asks for it. So if I go over here, I can deny or allow this. Well, let's allow this. And now let's see what happens. Apparently, this page's purpose in life is just to tell me my GPS coordinates with some degree of confidence. So we're at 42.3, negative 71.1. So if we look that up on Google Maps, we'll probably end up in roughly that location. Let's actually see if we can search Google by GPS coordinates. Let's go to the actual maps.google.com, search here. And indeed, we are, let's turn on satellite view. My laptop is underneath the grass there. And that's actually, it is true. We are in the basement. So it's pretty darn accurate. So how in the world does my laptop, which does not have a GPS radio, I'm not using my phone or anything in this context, how does Google know where my laptop is? So Wi-Fi, how do you mean? OK, so these are Wi-Fi antennas. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them in this room alone, at least. And those Wi-Fi radios all have unique identifiers of some sort. They have the SSID to which we connect, like Harvard University, and they have other metadata associated with them. For years, there was a technique known as war driving, which was like literally people in cars driving around trying to find open access, Wi-Fi access points for various reasons. And companies, among them Google, do this too, to figure out, just by driving around, for instance, where do you hear Harvard University? And they carry around a GPS radio with that computer program to say, I heard Harvard University at these GPS coordinates. But the world has gotten even more sophisticated than 10 years ago. Nowadays, we don't need cars driving around campus. Who is doing all of this snooping for us? Like all of us idiots, right? Every one of us that has one of these cell phones in our pockets that has a GPS radio and also has Wi-Fi or 3G or LTE access can be phoning home to Apple in this case, or if you have an Android phone, to Google in that case, if you have a Windows phone, to Microsoft in that case, telling the world when you're on the Harvard University network what your GPS coordinates are, when you're on the Starbucks network what its GPS coordinates are. So all of us are effectively phoning home and training these big companies to know with some degree of probability where we are. And clearly it works pretty well, but that's because we've all been helping them for some time. So putting aside the fear factor, let's just focus on the positive, which is what we can now do with this functionality. So apparently any random guy on the internet making a web page who knows some JavaScript and has a web server can write JavaScript code that asks the user for his or her location and then does something with it. In this case, totally underwhelming in that we just prompted the user with their GPS coordinates. But what could you use the location for to be more a sexier application? You could show the user's location on a map, right? I kind of implemented that myself manually by going to Google Maps and pasting it in. We could do that programmatically by using the Google Maps API. The website could tell me where the nearest Starbucks is based on my location. It could tell me what the news is for Cambridge, Massachusetts, or the weather for Cambridge, Massachusetts, because it knows where my coordinates are. So there's a number of things that can just lower the bar to giving me things that I might be interested in. So it's a pretty compelling user feature, albeit at utter cost of privacy. So how do we go about leveraging this? Let's look at the source code. This is geolocation0.html. Notice again, the body of the page is super simple with an onload attribute whose value is geolocate, arbitrary named function that I wrote. Could have called it whatever we want. Open paren, close paren means call it. And now if we look at the head of my page where the script is, again, I could be putting this code in a separate file, but I've kept it in the HTML file so all the demos are self-contained. Notice that we have two functions. One is literally called callback, and it takes an argument called position. Let's come back to that in a moment. One is called geolocate, no arguments. What does it do? It first checks if the type of navigator.geolocation is not undefined. So what does it mean if geolocation is not undefined? The browser supports it, which means we can proceed to use it without throwing one of those red error messages where like symbol not found or something like that. So navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition, and then I'm passing in what? Callback. But notice, there's a close paren around callback, but what is there not? There's not a pair of parentheses right next to callback itself. So am I calling callback here? So no, I'm just passing its address effectively. I'm passing a reference to that function to the function called getCurrentPosition so that he can call callback when he's ready. Now, why might it take some time? Well, we just saw an example. If the browser prompts me, the human, to decide yes or no, share my location, that could be a minute later, a second later, an hour later. You don't necessarily want the whole web page to lock up while you're waiting for the user's input. So instead, you do this asynchronous trick, whereby this function, getCurrentPosition, will return immediately. Close paren, semicolon, called. But it will call my callback function when it's ready to give me the GPS coordinates, which could be a second, a minute, an hour later. That function, when called, takes an argument called position. It turns out, and I figured this out by reading the documentation, inside of the position, as returned by this function, as passed by this function, is another property called coordinates, inside of which more specifically is a latitude coordinate and a longitude coordinate. So by accessing latitude and longitude and just concatenating them with a comma and a space, I get that very simple prompt that we saw a moment ago. So it's as simple as that. But we can refine this a little bit. Let me open up geolocation 1, which looks like it has the same behavior. But if I view the page source this time, what have I done differently? I'm sort of learning from past mistakes or reapplying past improvements. What's different fundamentally about this example? It's not undefined. So this we had before, though. Yeah, so I have a lambda function, an anonymous function, a nameless function where here, so what function name did I used to use? Literally callback. It could have been called anything. I just called it a callback. But if it's a callback whose purpose in life is to get called once in only one location and never again, why am I wasting time confusing me and subsequent readers of the code with multiple functions? Just put it where I want it. Now notice, function, open paren, close paren, position. So I'm still taking the same arguments. I'm just not bothering to give it a name. Then I call the alert. And I have to be careful. Notice I have open paren, close paren. So those are balanced. Open curly brace. So down here, I have to remember to close the curly brace, close the close paren. So that's the only price you pay and just a bit of syntactic potential for confusion. All right, it's pretty cool what you can do with the browser. Questions? All right, let's do one last big feature that'll take us home here. So here I have an example called ajax0.html. I said a moment ago, AJAX is asynchronous JavaScript and XML, though that's kind of a white lie these days because it doesn't always, and if ever, use XML these days. What does it do, AJAX, for us? So let's synchronously load data from servers or asynchronously. So both, actually. So the A means asynchronous, but you can run it in both modes. And it looks like this, which is a wonderful picture, which makes this super simple. Oh, it's actually pretty simple once we look at it. So here we go. AJAX is just a technique. It is the application of built-in features of JavaScript to programmatically get more data from a web page after the original web page is loaded. So we've seen this for years, thanks to things like Google Maps. For instance, when you click and drag on a Google map,